Hi, welcome to the week 4 lecture. This week I'd like to talk about engagement, work demands, and stress. Our text stated there's a relationship between worker engagement, workaholism, and burnout. That was on page 147. And it seems engaged workers can work compulsively and excessively. And I know I've seen this in organizations. And then in addition, with electronic devices today, workers literally are connected 24/7. So there's no escape from the work environment. I remember I was conducting qualitative interviews on the performance of team leaders in a large manufacturing organization, and I learned that most of the team leaders were experiencing high stress, and they were highly engaged workers. In other words, they were considered the best of the workers. And some had even acted out verbally against their team members when they were under high stress. Several of these leaders even had confided that they were seeking help from their personal physicians. In other words, they were on medication to help manage their stress. So engaged workers who are considered to be high performers and the best in the organization can also be under high stress. Now, it's also possible for our senses to habituate to the indicators of stress. Now, I just give an example. I remember a few years ago, I was doing some consulting work with a manufacturing company in Cleveland, and we after a day's work, there was a group of us, and we decided that we would stop at a local restaurant and to eat before we went back to the hotel. And when we went in there, it was happy hour, and it was packed. I mean, this was a popular place, and it was, I mean, it was an enjoyable experience. We liked the restaurant as well. But what happened is when we left and stepped outside, suddenly the realization hit all of us just how loud that environment had been, and to the point that it had been stressful, but we did not realize it when we were immersed into the environment. So it was not until we stepped outside that we realized, wow, man, that we really had been in a loud environment. Now, I can't count the number of people who have changed jobs and told me that they had no idea or no realization of just how much stress they had been experiencing until they left the job. And then once they left the job, then had the same experience. It's like, wow, I can't believe how much stress I'd been experiencing on the job. Now, the physical response to stress varies from person to person. I mean, some people experience increase in heart rate and blood pressure, which, by the way, meditation is very good at dealing with. Their skin becomes flushed. They can have a feeling of a physical rush. For me, I realize I'm under a lot of stress when my agenda becomes overwhelming and I'm kind of confused as to where I'm going to start. To me, that's the indicator that I need to sit down, do a meditation, and get my intention in order. And then once I get things in the right order, who was it, Stephen Covey said, first things first, then I'm okay and I move on. So response to stress begins with awareness, that a person needs to become aware of their own personal indicators so they know when they are experiencing high stress. Now, I just give you an example. There was a report a few years ago on Miguel Cabrera, who's an all-star hitter for the Detroit Tigers. And he's considered to be one of the best hitters in the league. And so when he comes to bat, normally the expectations are very high, and also he typically bats third in the lineup, so um, oftentimes there's runners on base and the expectation that he's going to bring them in. And if you watch him, he has learned to do deep breathing to control his physical state. And he'll step out of the batter's box, and if you can watch him, you can literally see him practicing this breathing. So what it does, he's able to control his response to stress so that while he is in the batter's box, he's in the optimum performance zone. And he does this so well that it was reported that other members of the team had asked him to kind of teach them what he was doing in order to control his internal state, because he did it so well. Now, too much stress triggers the fight, flight, freeze response, which comes out of the amygdala, and it decreases performance. And it's a natural defense mechanism that exists for everybody. And this mechanism evolved over time. It's a survival mechanism. And for example, if I were to come out of a building and start to walk across the street to where my car is parked, and I'm not paying attention, and suddenly there's a really large bus coming at me, I don't have to stop and think about what to do. It's like right away the fight, flight, freeze response kicks in, and I jump back, and my heart rate's increased, and I'm going, wow, that was close. I should have been paying attention. Now imagine if we didn't have this response, I'd step off the curb, I would see this bus coming, and I would have to think, wow, there's a really large bus coming at me really fast. What should I do? And obviously, without this response, some of us, we still wouldn't be here. I've through the years, one of my favorite standardized tests that I like to use in conflict is the Thomas Kilmann conflict modes instrument. And I've always liked Ralph Kilmann. I had a chance to meet him once in the 90s. I was a co-host at a conference, and he was a keynote, and I was able to talk to him personally, and I've always been impressed with his work. And recently I attended a webinar with him, and he reported that for the past 10 years, he'd been working in, what he described as high-stress work environments. As a matter of fact, he said most of them are. And what he had learned was that under high stress, he learned how the fight, flight, freeze response plays out with workers. And so he coordinated this or correlated this to his model. So, for example, he said competing, which under normal circumstances could be effective, it turns out under high stress, it turns out it's more of a fight mode. It's like shouting or verbally threatening, physically threatening. That was the kind of behaviors I was hearing in the qualitative interviews I did in that one organization. The avoid response correlates with flight, and they leave the area purposely avoiding something. Now, when I did those interviews, what I found out, some team leaders said, hey, when the stress became overwhelming, they would actually leave their department and go find an office somewhere else, and they'd sit down and do paperwork, because that allowed them to escape the stress for a short period of time. But at the same time, it left their department unattended, so their team members resented them not being there. And then accommodate style turns out to be the freeze mode. So it's like you hold your breath, you're stuck with inaction. You're seeing but ignoring. It's kind of like the stress. Like my freeze mode is when I feel overwhelmed because I have so much to do. I'm kind of, instead of doing something, I'm not doing anything. I'm like in a state of confusion, and that's when I realize, hey, I've got to move out of this stress mode in order to move forward. And notice this, Kilman stated that the collaboration and compromise, which are probably two of the most effective conflict styles in organizations, they literally go away. In other words, under high stress, they're not available to the person because they're not in a rational thinking mode. And so it seems that team leaders have reported incidents where they would do some of this fight, flight, freeze with their teams, and of course they weren't happy about it, but they weren't sure why it had happened, and and this helped them to learn it's related to stress. So the productive styles, collaborate and compromise, are not available to a person under high stress, and the GAS model kind of talks about what that does is it exhausts their resilience to stress. Organizations, Landy and Conti described three different categories of interventions for organizations in responding to stress. And the first one is called primary interventions. And this is trying to change the conditions of work to reduce the stress that employees experience. The job redesign, or the job is called, I think, the job characteristics model by Hackman and Oldham, is still a good model for as a primary intervention. Because let's face it, especially in manufacturing, some jobs are just bad jobs. It doesn't matter who's on the job or how motivated the individual is. Eventually, the job is bad enough that it affects them both in terms of stress and motivation. So job redesign can be very powerful. Now the problem is, right now we're in an era that's described as an employer's market. So there's more people wanting jobs than there are jobs available. And so some organizations are reluctant to do primary interventions. They kind of view the stress on the job as just part of the job. You either are resilient or you're not. And so they don't want to spend the money on primary interventions. So secondary interventions become a more popular way to deal with stress when they deal with it. Now, one common intervention is to provide an exercise facility on site. And this is very popular. A lot of employees take advantage of this, and it does reduce their stress. It's a very good intervention, and organizations are finding they can do this and really get a pretty big return on the investment. Stress management classes is also popular. You can have kinesthetic interventions such as muscle relaxation response, or meditation. Even I've known organizations that provide yoga classes after work hours, which once again very, very effective. And then there's the tertiary interventions. The most common one there is the employee assistance programs. A very good friend of mine was the late Tom Pascoe, and he was a past president of the EPA organization, and he was an innovator and pioneer in EAP for the auto industry. He actually designed EAP for GM, Ford, Chrysler, Blue Cross Blue Shield, MGM casinos in Detroit. So he was highly thought of as an advocate for EAP. And one of the things that he strongly believed was that employees served as very good EAP representatives because they understood the work environment, they knew the employees, and so they really had credibility with employees, and all they did was a referencing role. But that was very important. They would reference the employee to the community services available to help them deal with whatever their problems were, and certainly stress could be one. A lot of organizations today no longer use that approach, and they use professionals as third-party vendors for EAP. So they're still highly effective. Um, the challenge is getting employees to contact them because the employees don't know them, and so that just becomes an education process that these professionals are very good at what they do, and is confidential and can be trusted. So I know I was teaching a class. It's been a while back, but I was teaching an HR class, and as I asked employees there, I said, "How many or not employees, the students?" I asked how many, and they were all adult students. I said, "How many of your organizations offer EAP?" And I'll be honest with you, only a handful actually knew if EAP was available or not. So I made that a homework assignment. I said, research your organization, find out if EAP is an option that's available to you. And to their surprise, many of them discovered that their organizations offered EAP through third-party vendors, and they were unaware of it. So I think that's common, that a lot of employees are either unaware of EAP, or they have no idea of what services can be provided, or they don't understand the integrity and ethics of professionals, so they didn't know whether to trust it or not. So all that becomes an education process for organizations. So, I've got the references. They'll be in the transcript that I post. So, the bottom line is, in summary, I'd say, a person needs to learn their own indicators of stress, so that they know when they're experiencing high stress, and they have a personal intervention to move them out of that high stress and back to normal. Now, I've also learned, like for example, in breathing, I've learned several breathing techniques that take less than a minute to practice, but if they do practice them, it moves a person back to normal. And so all a person needs to do is, once they have awareness of the indicators, is practice a technique that moves them back to normal. And then, in addition, they need to find some type of secondary intervention. They can practice exercise, meditation, yoga to help manage their stress. And last of all, they need to become aware of programs such as EAP, which are very helpful, and especially in a time of need. And I think also when we're at a time where many employees move to a new area to accept employment, so they don't know what's available in the community. And the professional EAP reps do know. They know all the services that are available, and so it becomes an education process. Thank you.